Good morning. You'll be hearing some of the same things that Pastor shared with you this morning, but I'm going to really concentrate on the missions history of our church. And while I'm talking, you're going to see a whole series of pictures that depict mission activity in our church over the last many years. I hope you can look and listen at the same time, but I thought it was important that you get a sense of many of the things that our church has been involved in. And I would like for you to look at the faces of the people who have been taking part in these mission endeavors and see the joy that comes from participating in missions. I think there may be in the hearts of many people a bit of a misunderstanding about what missions is. I know there are some churches that have decided that missions is an activity like some other things, like Sunday school, and they just decide that we're not going to participate in it. But missions is really the reason the church exists. In Matthew 28, where Jesus told his disciples that you will be my witnesses in here. That in Acts 1:8, you will be my witnesses in Judea and Samaria and to the uttermost parts of the earth. The Great Commission, the Great Commandment. So the real focus of our church should be expanding the kingdom of God, to reach out to people whose hearts have yet to be turned to Christ, to reach out to areas where Christ has not yet been made known, to make Christ known. That's the purpose of the church, to grow God's kingdom into the hearts of people who haven't heard and into places where it's not proclaimed. All of the activities that we do here as a church, meeting for worship, focusing on God, and it sounds like I'm going to be bragging about the church when I begin saying some of the things that I'm going to say in just a minute. But I'm really bragging about God. So let's not forget that God is the focus of everything that has been accomplished in First Baptist Church over the 200 years of its history. So let's not forget that the focus of it is God, not us. We do stand on the shoulders of people of faith, but their faith was in God, just as ours is in God. As Pastor said, our church began as a mission activity of Locust Oldfield Church from over in Canton. And Pastor, I think that church was started about 1803, if I remember. And I think the impetus for that, although it ended up being a mission endeavor from Locust Oldfield Church, there was probably a little bit of self-interest in that as well. Imagine waking up on a cold January morning here in Waynesville and getting on the back of a horse or on the back of a wagon and traveling over to Canton on a cold January morning and sitting in a cold church and then getting on the back of a horse or on the back of a wagon and coming back to Waynesville. So I'm sure that there was some self-interest there that let's not travel so far to church. But the end result was a church was planted here. And as a result, people in this community had the opportunity to hear the gospel. They had the opportunity to attend a church. The first 25 years of Waynesville's First Baptist Church, the growth was fairly slow. It was difficult to maintain membership here. This area of the state saw a lot of people moving in from different areas, from the eastern part of the state, from the north, moving down. But a lot of those people just spent a few years here. Remember that time period from 1825 to 1850 was the time when we were expanding westward here in America. So a lot of people moved here, they became members of this church, then they moved on and went west. So it was difficult to maintain a stable membership here. But I like to think that as all of those people who came and settled here and then moved somewhere else, the legacy that they took with them as they went and established churches and became part of a church somewhere else the influence that this place had on countless places farther west. And as the pastor said, over a period of 30 years, from about 1870 to 1900, probably the biggest mission accomplishment of our church was the establishment of other churches. The first one occurred, I think, slightly before 1870, was the establishment of Mount Olive Baptist Church down the hill on Pigeon Street. Now, as the pastor has shared, that's probably not one of the brightest stars in our crown, because probably the impetus for starting that church was so that the black members, and they were part of this church up until Reconstruction and the Jim Crow era, were probably so that those black folk in our church and community would have a separate place to meet. So we have to be honest in probably what was the impetus behind that. But nevertheless, a new church was started, and that church is still active today, and it still functions in our community. Then there came Antioch. Antioch is over in the Arnduff community. Pleasant Balsam Baptist Church, if you go up the old Balsam Road toward Barber's Orchard, Pleasant Balsam's there on the right. Then Ratcliffe Cove Baptist Church over in this section of town, and then Allen's Creek Baptist Church. And I kind of think, what is the influence over the decades and decades that these churches have been in existence? The missions influence that we had then in those communities and providing a witness in those communities, but in the witness that has grown from those churches over the decades since. Think of the hundreds of people that have been reached for Christ. Think of the missionaries that have been supported, missionaries that have been commissioned and sent out, the pastors that have been ordained in those churches. The legacy of the combined strength of this church and those churches over the decades, I don't think anybody can measure until we get to heaven. So that was a real strength of the church during those decades. As Pastor said, we were one of the first to adopt Sunday school. And believe it or not, as he said, Sunday school has not been around forever. It actually started in England back in the early 1700s, but it wasn't until after the Revolutionary War that it actually began to take hold here in the U.S. I think it may be a little bit, I think maybe they should have called it something else besides Sunday school. Because what happened was Sunday school, school is for children. So when they started Sunday school, it was for children, and that was pretty much what it was for a century, or for more than a century. It wasn't until close to 1900 that even young adults and older adults really began to buy into Sunday school. And most of the churches here in our community didn't want to have anything to do with this newfangled idea of having Sunday school. So First Baptist Church was one of the early adopters of Sunday school, and the Sunday school movement was a real mission outreach of the church. Because one of the things that Sunday school movement did and emphasized was inviting people from the community, the children from the community, to take part in learning about the Bible. So it was an important evangelistic, important mission outreach of the church. Now, also, the Sunday school really wasn't an official part of the church. It remained kind of a separate organization from the church. Now, obviously, when they built the new building up here and they built Sunday school rooms, there was the recognition that this was an important ministry of the church, even though it really wasn't integrated into the finances and structure of the church. And that didn't happen until the early 1950s, when it first had kind of a unified budget. And the Sunday school, along with a couple of other things that I'll mention in a moment, became a part of the church. But it was very important. The Southern Baptist Convention was formed in 1845. That same year, the first missionary was appointed to go to China. And very soon after that, there were state conventions formed, and very soon after that, there were women's organizations formed to support the missions effort of Southern Baptist. Now, those women's organizations have been around even before that, even here in this church. But under the leadership of Fanny Heck and some other ladies at the state level, organizations were formed all across the state. And again, here at First Baptist Church, the women of First Baptist Church were among the first in this part of the state to organize themselves in support of missions. And that's the reason they were formed, was to support missions. And they, for 100 years, women in our church were the primary supporters of missions. They were the ones who organized fundraising efforts. They were the ones who collected the money. They were the ones who saw that it got sent to where it was supposed to go. Let's be honest, if it wasn't for the women in this church over the years, there really would not be a missions program in Waynesville First Baptist Church, because it was the women who made it happen and who saw that it was taken care of. They prayed for the missionaries. They encouraged others to pray for the missionaries. But again, the women's organization was not really a part of the church. It was allowed, it was tolerated, but it really wasn't, again, until 1950 that all of these things were incorporated into the structural organization of First Baptist Church here. The decades from about 1950, 1960 to 1980 saw a huge shift in the culture here in America. Those were decades that saw huge growth here at First Baptist Church of Waynesville. And there were a lot of things that were started here, a lot of ministry activities. During that period of time, the Baptist men even got organized. They gathered probably for about 25 years from what I can gather from what I've read. And at one point, they even said there was as many as 80 men who were participating regularly in the Baptist men's organization here. But it was also a time when there were strong revival movements, lay-led revivals. And that lay-led revival movement was an important mission outreach here in this church, and it even led some of the people in this church to travel to other states, other places in North Carolina, to Kentucky and Virginia and Tennessee, and even a group went to England to do a lay-led revival. So that was a strong part of the missions effort of the church during that time. But also during that time, there was a huge shift in the culture here in America. We all know the impact that had, and we're feeling that now. The shift is taking place and even accelerated. But it began, and churches all across America began to see a decline in membership and church attendance. And that was true here in Haywood County, here at First Baptist Church as well. We weren't immune to the things that happened. It happened a little bit later here in Haywood County than it did in other parts of the country, but it happened here, and that decline did start happening. But the support for missions here never really flagged that much, even though the membership did decline support for missions financially, and the prayer support continued unabated. But not all of those changes during that period were negative. One of the things that I think, at least in the church population, was that during that period of time, people really began to have a desire to participate personally in missions. As the pastor said, for the first 150 years of the history of our church, mission support was mainly through praying for missionaries and giving so that missionaries could go. And that was important. But things began to change, and it was kind of related to the cultural, financial shift that took place in America. During that period of time, our country became much more prosperous. Globalization began to take place. International travel began to become more feasible and much easier. It became possible for the regular church member to travel anywhere in the world. And people began to have a desire, rather than to just pray for missions, to just give to missions, there was a growing desire to also participate in missions. And if you see the tables in front of you, over the years since about 1980, folks from our church have made mission trips to many, many different parts of our world, many different states in our nation, and those mission trips were important. They were important to the individuals involved because it allowed them to be personally involved in missions rather than just hearing about it, rather than just praying, as important as that is, rather than just giving, as important as that is. Was those mission teams, those mission volunteers who came back really enthused about missions. A lot of churches were very resistant to the idea of sending mission volunteers in the beginning. They wanted to know if people are spending their money for plane tickets to go to these places, they're not going to give as much to missions. That really didn't happen. What happened was people came back much more enthused about missions. They prayed more effectively. They gave more of their money, and they still went on mission trips. So it was a very positive impact on the churches who supported volunteer mission efforts around the world, and ours was certainly one of those that did. Also during this time period, it became important to participate in disaster relief efforts, and that still is ongoing to this day. The opportunities when natural disasters, man-made disasters around the world happen, Christians and Christian organizations are often the very first people on the ground to help. And it is a part of our DNA as followers of Christ to extend love and compassion to people who are hurting. And also, during those periods of time, that people are open to listening to the hope that we have in Christ. Today, those things continue. We have a strong international presence. We have a young couple who are members of our church, Jan Sumter Brantley, and by the way, Jan Sumter's parents are here with us this morning. We're privileged that they're part of our fellowship, and we feel a responsibility to them so that every year we strive to send a volunteer team to be with them, to encourage them, to help them with things that will further their ministry. We also have a relationship with a church in Nairobi. So it's a long-established church, has a strong membership, and a pastor who has many years of experience in ministry. You might ask, why are we going to that church? Well, it's really for our benefit. They are strong people of strong faith, and we go so that we can simply join together with them as brothers and sisters in Christ and minister together. We're not going because we are the wise ones and we know how to do everything. We're going because we enjoy fellowship with them and because they have something to offer to us as well. We don't just go internationally. Our presence here in this community is strong and has been strong. Probably one of the biggest and strongest outreach efforts that we have is our Kid Create program that we started 5 or 6 years ago. The program after-school program on Wednesday evening, where we advertise, sign up kids from the elementary schools in our area. Our vans pick up kids from the school, and for a couple of hours every Wednesday afternoon during the school year, they have a variety of programs, including Bible stories and learning about Christ and the church. And it also gives a number of volunteers in our church not only the chance to interact with those children, but with their families as well. We also, every year, participate in Operation Inasmuch, where we reach out to people all across our community who need various kinds of help. I think the summer before the pandemic struck, we had a project with the Fines Creek Community Center, and I think every day during the week that we were down there, more than 40 individuals from our church of all ages, from kids all the way up through senior adults, were down there working and helping renovate that Fines Creek Community Center and interacting with folks from the community down there as they came through. We will not give up being who we are as people who want to minister to the community, as people who want to meet physical needs of people here. We will not give up being people who want to share the gospel with people who need to hear about Christ, both here and around the world. And we will continue to reach out. But remember that it's always for God's glory. That building His kingdom is the uppermost thing that we want to accomplish in all of our missions programs. Not that we can blow our own horn, but that we can sing God's praises. Thank you.